I want to first give the stage to Pragya from OpenAI's newest India hire to introduce more about what OpenAI is doing in India and then introduce Srinivas and get us started.
Thank you so much for all of you to come. And I think, Tanuj has teed it up really well. I joined OpenAI about 2 months ago now. Doesn't feel like it. Feel like I've been here for a long, long time. I was in SF in HQ for about a week. And I think why I'm mentioning this is just the energy and the focus around how can we do better in India? How can we build better for India? The idea was Srinivas is here, which is incredible. And, we want to make this time for you to share your experiences, what you feel what you feel the product is delivering for you, what maybe it's not, what can we do better, whether may not be on the tooling, but just on higher engagement. And we want to do many of these conversations more often. And, you will see much more of me. You will see much more of us doing this with People+ai and Tanuj's support. Srinivas will open it up and you'll hear some incredible insights from him on generally what's happening on the tool. But I think the only thing I want to call out is, please feel free to reach out and use this space the next 1 hour to really be candid and also ask some hard questions, maybe push us on a few things that we may not have thought about, because the idea is that can we really use this time to listen, learn, and also shape what we think India needs. Srinivas is not new to India. He is born and brought up here and been at IIT Madras. But I think just generally for me, I'm new to the AI world. I'd love to sort of hear from you on what else we can do. And so, yeah, that's pretty much it. That's my spiel. I think you're here to listen to Srinivas, so over to him. Why don't you sort of maybe share your top headlines now that you've been here for 1.5 days? Just what have you been hearing? What have you been listening? And I think generally people want to know what the plans for India are.
I've been working in tech for 30 years. I did my first AI class in 1994. I wrote my chess program back then. It was not very good, unlike the chess kids from Chennai these days. But I did study neural networks in the 90s, right? But of course, it didn't work very well back then. But the fact that we are here and we are seeing this momentous change in AI and how it is actually being put to scale at use is the biggest technological transformation of our lifetimes. And to be able to live through that, I think is just incredibly exciting and inspiring. Sometimes you get jaded being in technology for a long time. And I've seen multiple waves of technology. I grew up in India. I was here till 95. I went to grad school in the US and I saw the internet wave in the early 2000s. And it was, of course, very transformative. And then I saw the mobile wave in the late 2000s. That was also amazing. And then there was a cloud era probably in the, 15 years ago. This one just feels bigger than all of them, just in terms of broad impact it is having. It's touching every sector of society. And it's also, I think, has an amazing opportunity to uplift people in many different ways by providing expertise at scale. And so we're seeing these really interesting applications in farming, in agriculture, in education, in government services and things like that. And so it's just kind of really inspiring to be able to work on technology that has such a broad impact. And so, yeah, I'm just incredibly excited. I grew up here, so it's always close to my heart. I take the time to come visit as much as I can and interact with people. For OpenAI, we are a very young company. Of course, we have had the privilege to put out something that has become so popular in a very short period of time. It was not very expected. It wasn't planned. But at the same time, our organization is still young and we are growing and we are learning a lot. And we're not a very mature company or an organization. So, bear with us as we grow up. In some ways, the adoption of our products has just grown way faster than, the organization has, right? As a country, I think it's really important for us, for our mission, because we want to make AI beneficial for all of humanity. And of course, India is a huge part of that. And the diversity here also creates all sorts of challenges for AI, right? Like, is it able to understand all the nuances of this culture, the languages? And so when we are able to solve some of these problems, I think we have higher confidence that we can take this and solve for other parts of the world. And that's one reason why it's exciting. Of course, the reason of serving 1.4 billion people is exciting by itself. And then, of course, there are amazing developers here who are building for a global audience, right? And we are building transformative products. And so by being part of that ecosystem and helping all of you build great products for the world, and if we can be a part of that, that is also amazing for us. So,
yeah. No, I think totally agree. One question, then I'll hand it over to you.
One more thing I would add.
Yeah.
I think the other thing I have to say about India is just the approach to technology here in the last 10 years is with the DPI is just incredible. And it's a very unique approach to building services for people. And I don't see that anywhere else in the world. And India is really leading in that front, right? And so to be able to think about how AI is going to impact that, how to integrate with that sort of a mindset. I think that is very nuanced and very unique. And I think that's also, they'll hopefully create some really interesting collaboration opportunities.
Yeah, so I'm glad, so you laid out the journey of the technology space specifically for India. And I think, to Tanuj's point that we're in this moment, what do you think that, we all can do to make sure that we don't miss that moment? Because there's a lot of FOMO, a lot of when I talk to a lot of developers and at least a lot of enterprises, they want to make sure that India has a leading voice in this conversation, whether that's on policy, whether that's on solutions that we are developing in India and taking to the world. We have our own great companies, but a lot of them are serving the Indian market, and then some of them have obviously ventured out. What do you think, seeing this whole journey, what is it that we can do better or differently in this moment?
I'm a very practical person. I think the best advice I have is just get as hands-on as you can, not very theoretical. AI is like, the interesting thing, as many of you might watch the Twitter threads, is like, there are really, really smart people who are on complete opposite ends of spectrum in this debate, right? About whether AI is going to improve all of our lives or kill all of us. And it's amazing for me to watch and you have really different perspectives on this. And what it tells you is that we really don't know, and we just have to be thoughtful about how we approach the technology. And when we have very smart people disagreeing so fundamentally, I think for me, it says personally that let's just approach this with caution and let's take one step at a time, be grounded in facts and reality, not just in hypotheticals, but be very thoughtful about how we deploy technology and be very iterative and learn as we go, right? I think that's the advice I would give anybody else, which is just be hands-on, learn, be iterative, and let's not get too theoretical and abstract. Safety is obviously a very big part of our mission. Our mission statement includes basically, our mission is to build AGI that is safe and benefits all of humanity. And when we think about safety, there is sort of a process perspective on how we look at safety work. And then there's an outcomes perspective, what do we mean by safety, right? So let me start with the outcomes perspective, and then I'll talk about the process too. From an outcomes perspective, I think I look at this in multiple horizons. So there are technologies that are already deployed today. And for the things that are deployed today, how do we create policies that sort of reflect our human values? And here there are things around, are the models being put to use in a way that, we would look at it and say, no, I don't want the model to say these things, right? Whether it's hateful speech, whether it's spreading misinformation. There are clearly things that we don't want to happen. And so we put a lot of effort in crafting policies that are what we believe are reflective of our values. And then we build systems that can enforce them at scale. And how we enforce them at scale, I think there's a lot of training of models that goes on. And there, I'll come back to the process perspective, that we look at safety from every step of the process, right? From how we curate data sets for pre-training, how we create reward models in the post-training phase so that the models are aligned with human values. We do red teaming. And then as we deploy models, we of course also deploy lots of classifiers that can verify whether they are producing outputs that are misaligned. And how do we do enforcement at scale, right? So it's sort of it's a system that it incorporates deeply into every element of the work we do. And then before we release new models, we go through rigorous processes. And in fact, we haven't released the audio models, which are amazing, by the way, the GPT-4o, partly because we haven't done our safety evals yet, right? And so we need to get them right. And before we get them right, we don't want to just release them, right? So we just show the demo. So that's an important part. That is sort of what I would call as immediate sort of safety concerns. But then there is questions around, okay, these are safety concerns around capabilities of the current models. Then there are questions around, are there new capabilities that might emerge from the next generation models, and should we be worried about it? That is also an important question, right? And so there we have this framework called the preparedness framework that thinks about what sort of risks that we might need to worry about for future model capabilities. And here we look at few different dimensions. We look at ability to, create new biological weapons, the ability to actually subtly persuade humans, the ability for chemical weaponry and, things like that are sort of a little bit more, I would say the risk is higher in those. And today, the evidence of these models doing this is very low. But we don't want to be caught off guard after we release a model and realize that, oh my God, there is actually a really significant risk here. Now, the price on like different people will have different opinions on the magnitude of the risk here. So, but what we believe is in that it's just better to be safe and think about this proactively and at least have a framework for evaluating models. And especially as we build future models, let's evaluate them upfront and be proactive about them than be reactive about them. So that's the preparedness framework, right? And so that's kind of like we look at this in different time horizons. And then we also look at like, okay, when as models become smarter and smarter, how are we going to be able to guide them in a way that they might be even smarter than us in many ways? And so what does that look like? And how do we build systems that can align super intelligent models? That's an open-ended research problem. So we look at this. So there's really looking at safety from lots of different time horizons and dimensions.
So, folks, this is more for y'all to also ask questions to Srinivas and to Pragya if you have any on their plans. I'm going to go, Srinivas, from general to specific in the end. Let me start with some very easy, questions. Warm you up,
but very warmed up already.
But okay, but let me ask you one thing that might sound really idiotic, but I really want to ask. Right, your title is VP of Engineering. What do you do? Like, what is it actually your day-to-day look like, or what are you responsible for?
Yeah. So I lead the engineering teams that are responsible for building all of our products.
Okay.
So OpenAI has a research arm that builds, frontier research stuff, but then we also have a product arm, which is building all of our products, that is ChatGPT or developer APIs, as well as other things that will come in the future. So my team is directly responsible for building all of our products.
Got it. So custom GPTs, the memory sort of feature, everything around that is you. Excellent. So another easy question is like, what therefore has been a use case of AI? Not, of course, you're building products with AI, but something that people are doing in your own job, like inside communication admin, something that surprised you and you're like, oh, we didn't see this coming.
I mean, I've seen lots of use of internal company processes that have just been automated through our own tools. Mm-hmm. And I'll give you maybe one example within the company. I'll give you one example outside the company also. That's interesting. One example within the company is recruiting. I obviously spend a lot of time on recruiting. And like any company, we also have our own internal processes. And there's sometimes we have to generate documents and stuff like that. So somebody just created a internal tool. And now that can automate some aspects of our recruiting and make it easy for us to create, processes and documents and things like that. I think that's like a really good use. The second use is our own support systems for OpenAI are also heavily automated through our own internal models. I would have expected that, so it's not surprising, it's really good to see it happen at scale.
That's right.
The one I would say I was pleasantly surprised is, though it was part of the thesis when we created GPTs, when I see actually my immediate friends and family using it, it's very heartwarming. So I have friends who, my brother is a professor and he has class notes and he put all of them and created a custom GPT so you can ask it questions. So that was like a really interesting use case, right? So, and then I have a friend who travels a lot and who writes, she always has recommendations for anywhere you go, like, oh, go to stay in this hotel or eat at this restaurant, but it's all her unique advice. How do you get that to people at scale, right? You can create a custom GPT for that, right? And then say, look, this is all the things I have in my head of what I think is good. And I want to be able to do that for anybody, right? But then that should be conversational. It should be based on the question. And that's not easy to do today with any tool, right?
Yeah.
I think that's a great use case. Like, how do you take your expertise, put it into a tool, and then make it available for anybody?
Very interesting, right? So you're seeing more people connect with use cases where they can bring in a little more of their personality or their data and their structure into it. What's a working definition of AGI internally at OpenAI? How do you know if when you're doing something, are we moving closer to that or away from that? Or is this on the path to that at all? How do you judge that? And then why not just generative AI? It seems to be like the technology is very powerful. Why specifically, why are you still aiming for AGI when there seems to be so much value to be created in this space?
So the word AGI it's just a term. I don't know whether it's the right term or not, but I think the way we think about this is sort of, can we have AI systems that can do the work like humans do in things that are economically important and viable, right? And so that I would say is the general definition that we use of intelligence, like being able to be as good as humans in various like economically feasible work, whether it's reasoning, whether it's planning and things like that, right? And so that I think is broadly accepted notion of intelligence.
Okay. So every product you do is measured in, is this going to help essentially augment or maybe even replace a human who is doing this job?
Yeah, whether it's replacement or not, I think that
is
it's like a subtle question. But what I would say is, is it taking us further in terms of being able to think about intelligently about problems, right? And today, one way you can look at this is that, in many tasks, if you look at standardized exams, AI is actually better than humans in many ways. You can argue whether that's, generalizable or not, but I would say it's reasonably generalizable.
Fair.
In some domains, it's as good as maybe interns, maybe not as good as experts. But then we want to continue that progression, right? Like maybe from an intern, you should get as good as the best people in that world. And then once you're there, maybe the best people in the world can use this as a tool to even improve what they're doing.
So then do you see that these systems start generating novel knowledge and novel content?
Yeah, we're not there yet today, but that's the hope.
And you see that as a reasonable, like within the realm of possibility that these systems start producing novel knowledge and novel content?
Yeah, and that's the hope, absolutely.
Okay,
yeah.
That's interesting.
And to your second question on why generative AI was not, I think the word generative AI is probably a misnomer.
Okay.
It generates stuff, but the most amazing part is not that it generates stuff, it's the fact that it actually reasons. That I think is the core, and that's why I think the word AGI or intelligence is better to me than just talking about it as generative. Yeah, generation is a part of what we do as humans, but so is reasoning and so is other things. So for me, it's just intelligence.
I mean, ask a follow-up question.
And there's a follow-up question out of the intelligence question. There's obviously been a lot of studies about the hard problem of consciousness. And obviously, the touche is like how you even define consciousness, but that is the hard problem of consciousness. Has there been any glimpses of this in the work that you guys been doing?
Yeah, I think we don't know what consciousness means, and I don't think we have very good definitions of it. I don't think we have a very good scientific understanding of it. Yeah. So my honest intellectual answer is like, until we define that, I don't know how to answer this question. I think the philosophical part would be in thinking about safety and risk of frontier models that I talked about, the preparedness framework. I don't know if it is necessarily philosophical, but it's more about what new capabilities emerge, understanding that deeply, and understanding ways in which that might be detrimental for society and mitigating that. So that absolutely is part of the mission and the ethos of the company.
Hello, I'm Nirant. I'm a machine learning engineer by training and most recently worked with Quadrant, which used to be, I think OpenAI used that as well. So my questions are around what you mentioned, reasoning in particular. So parts of reasoning, let's say if we were to break it down in terms of memory and planning, adjacent problems and parts of it as well. What progress do you foresee in, let's say, the next 18 to 36 months? Like it's 2 to 3 years, basically. Especially in terms of multi-steps. So most systems today can do something between 3 and 6 with some degree of reasonable expectation, because the more steps you can go, that means you should also have the ability to trace back and say, okay, this is perhaps a dead end and I need to come back. And this obviously ties back to some of the work OpenAI research is doing around Q-star and things like that. So what I'm looking for is what do you expecting next 2 to 3 years and 2 longer term research directions?
I do expect us to make progress in the complexity of reasoning that our models are able to do today. And today they are, like you said, they're not doing deeper thinking and, they're sort of doing very surface level stuff and coming back with answers today. We, perhaps spend the same amount of computation irrespective of the complexity of the task. All of these things I think can change and adapt over time. But I think as a core primitive, I would expect the model to be able to take on more complex tasks and do better reasoning.
We're being about reasoning, right? That might be types of reasoning, yeah. And it gets complicated as you get into philosophy and reasoning and logic orientations. And current architectures, new architectures are best mimicking, right, some complex values. That's one side of the deal. So when you see current architecture evolving, especially the model architectures evolving towards side prediction, reasoning is far more
I'm not going to say that we know that the current architecture will just get us and just you need scaling to get us all the way there. I do think you probably need other breakthroughs. But it's not clear to me that those breakthroughs won't happen. There's probably lots of innovation happening, and I think we're at a pretty interesting point that scaling alone will probably get us pretty far. And I don't think we have seen just the limits of scaling, even with current architectures. But I would also bet, I think, us as a scientific community on having other breakthroughs in algorithms/architectures as well. That combined with scaling, I think will kind of keep. I actually think they're sort of just a spectrum in the sense that I think a lot of the work you're doing on large architectures actually help the small models also. If in some ways the small models today are just smaller versions of a large model, right? And so by being able to train a large model, you have proof point that these are things that are really useful. And then there's a whole bunch of techniques you can use to create smaller models out of them, which are really useful. And the reason for having smaller models are good. Like, you want lower cost, you may want to run them on device, and all of these sort of are good reasons. So, and you might want a different price performance point where you want to operate for a specific product. So I think that's a healthy thing. And I would expect the ecosystem to have a plethora of models, not necessarily one model. But it's also important to realize, like, I don't think they are like A versus B. It's A and B.
What are the most promising directions that you see? I noticed you mentioned this, which I've heard from OpenAI often, about changing the amount of compute behind every problem, right? Deciding that dynamically and then allocating compute. That seems to be one general broad research direction that you're taking. Anything else that top of your mind is a promising direction? Also, especially when it comes to multimodal capabilities.
I think multimodality is pretty big for us, and we have already seen that, right?
Yeah.
So the future models are going to become inherently multimodal. Audio in, video in, text in, and any out. I think we also want our models to become, like we talked a little bit about building more agentic workflows, right? So today's models don't take actions on our behalf very well. Like they're generally giving you answers to questions. And in many of these domains, there's a certain level of tolerance to answers to questions, error tolerance. But when you start taking actions, things get a little bit more complicated. You want to be careful. So how do we build models that learn how to take actions on our behalf? And we have had examples. The simplest example we have today is function calling, where you can teach a model to call functions. But again, there's hallucinations and, the tolerance for error may be lower. But I think I see that as another important element where we want AI systems to be able to do more things on our behalf, more complex things on our behalfs. I think that's another element.
So multimodal, action-oriented, and dynamically deciding how much compute.
The dynamic part is just one example. I think, what I would say the underlying thread there is how do we get AI to solve more complex things and do more reasoning things? And I don't think there is we know the exact answer. There's going to be a plethora of research techniques there.
And this is sort of maybe where do you draw the line is a big question. But let's say when mixture of experts came out, etc., right? You took the same architecture, trained sort of multiple things. Like you're just sort of in some ways compositing you're still scaling, right? But you're compositing to get an answer. How much do you think what, say, Perplexity is doing, which is that they're trying to take a particular domain, break down the problem. Okay, search means first I'll do this, then I'll do retrieval, then I'll break this problem down and go retrieve. Like how much more of that kind of human workflow on top of intelligence versus just taking a model, scaling it, or finding some algorithmic breakthrough that just makes it more generally capable, right? Between these two, do you see, especially for the builders in the room, would you say that, one or the other?
I don't know if that is going to be a universal answer. Even the search example, there are two ways of doing it, right? One is you kind of manually say, this is the step-by-step way. I'm going to break down the problem. I'm going to do some query analysis. I'm going to pull the search results. I'm going to do some summarization, and you can manually curate that workflow. Or you can say, I'm just going to teach the AI to do the whole thing.
Yeah.
Right? I think from a capability perspective, teaching AI systems to do the whole thing will probably yield higher quality answers in the long run. Now, there is a cost question and a latency question. Does your application tolerate a very high latency? Because if you start asking the model to do everything, it may just take longer. And so in many cases, you don't want all of that. You want certain latency for the application to behave it. And so in those kinds of things, you might want a more hand-engineered approach where you have more control over all these things. So I think that depends on the characteristics of the application.
But do you think steerability will become a concern? Because they're more capable and more complex. You therefore want more degree of control, right? And at least assurances, what it cannot do.
I think sometimes when people talk about things like steerability and things like that, I worry that they are extremely vague, inspired by a false sense of security of what you want the model to do.
Yeah.
And so I would just push a little bit harder on what do you really mean. Because there are certain ways to control the model behavior. You can just align an AI model and say that is good, that is not good, and that's the way you should behave. And we have existence proof that we can do that. So I would argue that steerability is possible. And so it's just a different way in which you get the steerability, which is not that I have to control everything. I'm just going to give more general guidance to an AI system and assume, and then get the answers that I want, right? So I would say these are two different ways of approaching a problem. And my bet is that more bang for the buck as the AI gets better, like you're going to get more bang for the buck with the other approach. Modulo, performance, cost, all these constraints. But having said that, the performance and cost are very real. So even internally at OpenAI, we use both these approaches, right? Sometimes we do the hand engineered stuff. Sometimes we do let the AI model do everything stuff.
I am from physics tech startup. So basically something on the similar lines I wanted to know. So nowadays, whatever research or products or applications which we see in the market, that is more of the predictive analytics side of the AI. So I just wanted to know, where are you seeing the prescriptive analytics side going forward with the advent of this AI coming forward? For instance, let's say in the medical domain, right? So do you see that after a couple of months or couple of years, the prescriptive side of doing things, can that be reproduced, or where do you see, or are there some inherent limitations in the algorithms or the technology we are doing as of now?
I mean, that has always been there in almost, I would say, in many AI problems, right? Which is you're using past data to predict the future. In some ways, that is what we do as AI. When you talk about doing prescriptions like in various domains, I think you will see more and more of that. I would say that your confidence in using the results from the AI system should improve over time as the AI models get smarter. What you might see in the early days is that it might be more of a human will review especially in sensitive domains. If you especially talk about medical and things like that, if it is going to come up with a diagnosis, you might want a human to review what it's saying and say, yeah, that makes sense, right? But I think over time, as you are able to have more trust in the system and it takes on more complex tasks, you should be able to rely on it.
I don't know if you read that O'Reilly paper with Charles Fry, Shreya Shankar, a bunch of people wrote what we learned from a year of building LLMs, right? Where sort of their opinion on this is very different, which is that think of the model that is an engine that is keep getting better and better. But all the other stuff you do, cleaning, knowing your user, getting very specific, etc., those systems around the model still remain your moat, right? Like that's what their opinion is. Do you see energy, data, and sort of efficiency on the chip side? Do you see any of these sort of slowing down, or the opposite question? Which one of these you definitely see on that pathway to acceleration?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, my bet on the foreseeable future is that we're going to need more compute. Definitely as a result, you're going to need more energy. And you will see system-wide efficiencies at every layer. You will see efficiencies at the chip layer, you'll see efficiency at the architecture layer, on sort of overall infrastructure layer, and how people are using things creatively as well. So, I mean, I'll just give you one data point, right? The cost of GPT-4o today is 6 times cheaper than the cost of GPT-4 9 months ago. It's a pretty drastic cut in price for this. Yeah, look, I firmly believe we are in an exponential curve. So just plot that out for the next 2 years.
You've also been here, right? Now, and I remember meeting you not too long ago. And you come here often, which means as you were going about your trip in India, or as anything that you look at and be like, 5 years from now, this won't be happening in this way, right? Especially in India. Like, do you see something and you're like, taking the work I do to its logical conclusion, this is not how things will happen in India 5 years from now?
Yeah, we are interested in making our models more broadly useful across the world, including multiple languages. And 4o is definitely a step forward in that direction, both in terms of performance and quality on Indic languages, but also for the cost, right? So the tokenization stuff we solved, it's 3x fewer tokens in most of the Indian languages compared to the past. It's not entirely solved, but of course, we want to continue the trajectory. And we're very open to having data partnerships or others that will just help us continue to improve the models. So that's one dimension I would say. The second dimension I would say is that there is always going to be unique domains that our general model would have never seen in the world, right? For example, every company has unique data sets, and of course, we're not going to train on them for the world. And so we will always have a approach in which people with proprietary data sets or unique data sets that they care about can be brought to the fold, and we can create some custom model through whatever technology is at the moment, whether it's fine tuning, custom model development, whatever it is, to solve unique challenges for that domain, whether that's a country specific challenge or a domain specific challenge or whatever, right? So I think, yeah, both general model quality raising for languages plus the unique approach of bringing unique data sets and solving the problem, I think that'll be the strategy. I don't know the specific performance for the audio stuff for new languages, but hopefully we'll continue to improve that. Other thing I would say is that there is clearly cross-language transfer, right? It's like the fact that the model is generally intelligent actually makes a whole lot of value independent of whichever language you operate in. And it is remarkable to me that these things even work this well in Indian languages because there's not that much Indian language data sets here, right? So there's a fair amount of cross-language transfer that happens, and that should also continue to rise. When we dream of AI and benefiting humanity, it's aspirational. And I am really seeing people doing these things on the ground in India, which is super inspiring, right? I think I mentioned Physics Wala as an education app. When I talked about this in Delhi yesterday, there's Digital Green that is really helping farmers get better advice. There's 10-bed ICU that is trying to help scale, provide doctor assistance to people in remote areas using AI. And I mean, incredible. These are all like what we hoped for. And in less than 2 years since we launched ChatGPT, all this is kind of happening. That combined with the fact that the models are going to continue to get better, just gives me a lot of optimism and hope that we're going to provide expertise at scale where it is really needed. And so that is amazing. The things that I'm not sure is clearly there's going to be a lot of economic impact and jobs of the few. What are the jobs of the future? How is this going to happen? I can't really predict that. I'm fairly sure that the jobs of the future will be different, but the shape of that and how it's going to change is going to be hard to predict.
Can I just double click on something you said about this data? There's not a lot of Indic language data. Cross-language transfer happens. But now sort of you all have moved the puck already to voice to voice, right? Which means you were training on audio tokens. How do you still see the equivalent of cross-language transfer happening in voice to voice, or are we going to need much more spoken stem-code data?
I think they are multimodal. The models are multimodal. So audio, I think the fact that we are trained on language clearly helps voice.
Works. Okay. Yeah. So you see that continuing in this realm?
Yeah. If you're a founder, what would your advice or persona of a founder or a product manager be, and not so much to a data scientist or an engineer?
Let's say you're operating a current business. I would think about this from sort of three perspectives, which is within the company, you have all kinds of workflows happening and you have a workforce. How do you use this technology to just improve productivity of all of the people internally in everything that you do would be a very, I would say, simple step forward. And I already see this happening in many, many companies, right? To look at your products and my firm belief is that intelligence is just very contextual, right? We are humans, we look at things and then we analyze things on the thing, and then we kind of try to make that better. Every product that exists in the world has the opportunity to just be smarter and more intelligent. If you're building an ERP product and you have a bunch of forms, if a human is able to do that, why can't I suggest a no automate? So try to automate or try to use intelligence and embed into every one of your existing products. So I think that's the second step I would think about. The third thing I would think about is the transformation, which is AI is a completely new interface, right? It has created this new ability for us to engage with technology in natural ways. And I think often as a result, and that the capabilities are growing at quite a fast pace. So I would also think about, okay, if I want to solve this problem completely from scratch today, and I didn't have anything built, what would I do? I think you need to think about this in all these different forms. The fact that you have an AI that can do a lot of things that, historically, but we might not have imagined that future. I think you need to think from scratch, whether it's education or, other things. Like, I think you have an opportunity to reimagine how we can build these products. So I would think about this in all these forms. And I think for the entrepreneur or the startup founder, the third form is probably the most important, right? Which is, how can you reimagine a world in which you have a super smart, intelligent agent that is available at the core of everything? And how do you leverage that to do things in better, faster, smarter ways that we have? And it is also a change in the interface. It is a completely new, novel form of how we're going to engage with technology. And I don't think this has been available at a scale that we're going to see it ever before. So I would think that creates a lot of opportunity.
I'm going to tack onto that and say sometimes in this ambiguity kind of phases, crystal ball gazing and asking you to tell us what to do is probably harder. But it might be easier from lessons you already learned to tell us what should we definitely not do. What are areas in which people have either shut shop or invested resources and then said, this is a dead end, right?
Yeah.
So if you can tell us, that might save some energy.
Yeah. I'll tell you what, there is one theme that I've seen sometimes, which is people who bet on the technology and people who bet against the technology. It's a little bit nuanced in the sense that the people who bet against the technology, they're not betting against AI. But what they're betting against is they're saying, oh my God, AI is hallucinating. Oh my God, like it has this so small problem. Oh my God, it has a small problem. And it doesn't work. Therefore, I'm going to do all these things in very highly custom manual ways to make it work. And what happens is 6 months later, all these problems are solved, right? So that is something you should avoid. You should bet on the general intelligence rising, and you need to be prepared for a world in which the general intelligence is rising. The second thing I would say is that for me, it's very clear that vertical applications, there is an enormous amount of opportunity and demand, but then when people say, I want to build a foundation model, like, are you really going to compete with the people who are going to build foundation models? I think that's something you should think about pretty seriously. How are you going to differentiate yourself? I would think about that. I think there are also people who are trying to build very horizontal tools. And this is where I think there is like a question mark for me, which is how much of them are going to get subsumed versus not. And I think there the jury is out. I think there it really depends. And I think the answer is more nuanced.
Serving the developer is one thing where you're trying to make a developer's life easy. But if you think that your moat or differentiation will be that my model will be better at this horizontal capability than the current foundation model, I agree. It might be harder to keep that difference, maintain the gap even if you can do it today.
With any technology, there's kind of like, there is benefits and there is downsides, right? What I have seen so far is that the benefits for many people are really super useful. Like, the fact that you can get a summarized answer has been extraordinarily useful for people. The fact that the answer is very personalized to how you ask the question is extraordinarily useful for people. And so where I've seen people use this is in use cases where the tolerance for error is okay. It's reasonable. Like, sometimes you call it as like, if you're just asking for recommendations and things like that, yeah, it's fine if like once in a while I get something that may not be the right thing. So I think people are mentally tuning towards ways in which they are able to compensate for the downsides of the model, right? Coding is another example. I mean, coding is a domain where you can't tolerate error, but the fact that it's able to generate a whole bunch of stuff and you can review it quickly and then adjust it as it speaks, that I think is a pattern that we have seen, right? So I think basically one of three things is happening where people are leveraging the benefits and mitigating the downsides. Number one, the tolerance for error is reasonable, so you can use it. Number two, you have some way to automate, to verify the output of the system, right? Coding is one example, right? Like if it doesn't compile, or you can run a unit test and say whether the code is right or not. So if you can automate that, then you can trust the system more. Three, if neither of these two things work, you have to have a human review it, right? There is enough use cases in one of these three buckets that people are already finding leverage and value. Now, what my hunch is that we're going to continuously whittle away at hallucinations and things like that, that these sort of the use cases are going to continue to grow over time. They're not going to entirely go away. And the other thing we will do is we will be able to do annotations, we'll be able to do references, we'll be able to say, hey, I gave this answer because this is sort of what I found in this. And so I think those kinds of tools will grow over time. And so my hunch is that like just the amount of usage that you find will kind of continue to grow with these. Your question about can I generate interesting advice for me for new strategies, contrarian views? Absolutely. I think it will give you that. Now, is it fundamentally new knowledge that has never been done in the past? I don't know that. But for many of us, that's not necessarily what we need. We just need some interesting perspective that somebody might have expressed in some domain. We might need to transfer that to this domain. I think AI can definitely help with a lot.
So we're doing this one project, sorry, quick aside. We're doing one project here called Project Sukoon. Basically, in fact, got one of our largest number of volunteers for any project, right? We got some 60 people signed up, etc. I spoke to a few people at least saying, why are you so interested in, for mental health, talking to an AI, right? Like, sort of, why would you trust a machine with this? I was being contrarian, right? Just to see why people are here. And more than a couple of people completely independently reported to me that there was a day when I was having a bad day or I was having whatever, and I went and I spoke to that AI, right? And because I spoke, I could see the potential for how this is a more private experience of me articulating my emotions, having the LLM respond back, and like going through that process helped me in a little way. So I would like to, bring this about and share it with a lot of people. Of course, risks and challenges, and you may not advertise this as this being a definitive source. Like there is a warning label in ChatGPT, etc. But people do what they do, right? Like you can't stop people from believing WhatsApp by just saying forwarded at the top, right? Like so that's some of the concerns all of us need to think about.
When we train the models, we are teaching it to say, look, I'm giving you some answer, but don't treat this as like an answer. I'm not an expert. I'm not a doctor. When you repeat that when the part of the answer, at least you're setting expectations with the users.
Yeah.
That is actually a part of how we think about safety and train our models and align, right? And some, honestly, people complain. And it's like, oh, it's giving me all this gyan. I just want the answer. I'm like, no, we can't do that. We need to tell you this, right? Our mission at OpenAI is to build AGI that is safe and make it beneficial for all of humanity. The way we're going to make it beneficial for all of humanity is not alone, right? We're going to have to work with all of incredible developers and entrepreneurs like many of you in this room. We're going to have to work with this to transfer the benefits of AI to the world. And I think the innovations that I'm seeing here is just amazing to watch. And there's huge amount of ambition when I talk to people. And so I think it's just really inspiring.